Good morning. I have had quite the week. I have had quite the week. I have been working with the book and with others, getting the book written and finished. And at least the first half of the book, we aren't going to probably get it published till February or March of next year because there's a second part of the book that needs to get finished that is just really important uh, to get done. So we so we're busy. We're busy about publishing a book, and I think it's been quite transformational for those of us that have been involved. But one of the dynamics I wanted to speak about today was this idea of metacognition. It's a common term. If you look it up, it's the ability to be aware of one's own thinking and to watch how one thinks, not watch and think about, like have an opinion about what one thinks, but more to be able to see how thoughts are sequenced, see when you can't think beyond a certain framework of thought. But I am spelling metacognition, META dash cognition. And in that metacognition, there is the ability to meta beyond your present thinking. And I went in and I looked up definitions of cognition and thinking, and I looked up all these words. I've run into it quite a bit in the book, and nowhere are words geared, not nowhere, but often simple things that all human beings use, like thinking. There's no definition that talks about the power of thought except to manifest or fix things in the physical world. And that's true, but the metacognition I'm talking about is different. It's this, until I got into this chapter on multidimensionality in the book, and I've just been very dissatisfied with it, and realized I had a mini book in the midst of as a chapter and pulled all that out. I didn't really realize that the thinking that I think with, that many of you get to hear me think with, is has a phenomenon to it of being directly present to what I'm thinking, to being in the activity, in the presence of what I'm thinking. So it's very, and we say it very simply in the what's the word, in the guidebooks for the Language of Consciousness Institute. We say in there, in those guidebooks, and when the teachers teach it, that there is the statement that there, what may be in the Language of Creation book. I'll post a link to purchase that on here because I think it's really, really important to realize that we mostly think about something. We don't think with something. So when you think about something, you are not cognitively present to what you're thinking about. It's distance from you. You're reporting in on. You're having an opinion about. If you even let yourself listen to your thinking, which is about being is metacognition without the dash, you can tell you're thinking about something as if it's separate from you. not thinking with something as if it's part of you or you are relationally in unity with it. So that's the baseline that the Language of Consciousness Institute and the work of Tantra Mott deals with. And as I've gotten deeper into it, I realized there is such that mesmerization. There's such a mesmerization of human beings that actually are caught in thinking about all the time, and they don't realize that thinking about thinking is thinking them, that they aren't really thinking. Cognition is being aware of thoughts, being aware to look at the patterns of thoughts, to see how your thoughts organize. And as near as I can tell, most people are busy thinking the thoughts they're thinking are, well, I just don't think they've discerned that. I don't think they've realized that that something's thinking them, that these patterns of thinking about are thinking them. So when I began to, I have a whole ebook on my relationship to dimensionality because I have had a multidimensional consciousness since I was young, and it actually almost generated me being schizophrenic, clinically schizophrenic when I was 16. If I hadn't had a psychiatrist work with me, not medically, I got no drugs, to help me understand that my thinking was different than other people's thinking, because I wasn't thinking about something, I was actually present and in the field or landscape or consciousness where the thinking I was thinking occurred. It's sort of like, they were asking me yesterday to give examples, but it's really hard to give examples because one example could torque, like everything goes that way, and it doesn't. Everything doesn't go that way. Everything goes multidimensionally. But if you have a direct experience of a living intelligence of something, a living consciousness of something, consciousness means it has an awareness. There is an awareness, or it has an awareness. If you're in that activity of being within another awareness, you have not only your own thinking, you also are present to the thinking of that other awareness. So if you read my book, An Irish Tale of a Modern Mystic, basically I entered into, at some point, a metacognitive, META dash cognitive way of receiving and sending a transmission of relationship. Not so much information, but relationship. And that's the other thing. The present cognitive what's the word I want? It's addiction, but it's not like you're an addict. Addictive thought patterns are about not relational. They're informational. So it's basically, if you give me what I want, or if you think like me. But relational thinking is a whole different thinking. So I guess if I were using terms, metacognitive different than metacognition, the way it's defined, and humans relating with humans and relating with learning, because learning is very different than being present to something. One of the exciting things that's happened in the Institute and with the lecturer and I and me and Heather and a few others is that as we've found verbiage, that verbiage increased our capacity to be present to something that we couldn't be present to, we couldn't give it a name. we couldn't give it a place, because for a human being to give something a place, it has to live in language. And it has to live in language that isn't about talking about or thinking about. It's really in the presence of. And it's a language that develops from being relational, being in a relationship with, being part of. Uh, uh, everything's part of everything else. Everything operates on behalf of everything else, and everything, um, I say part of or in relationship to everything else, and yet everything has its own place. So it's the tantric, really, if you can take the sexuality of it. So this idea of thinking with is really what the human brain is being pressed back into service, being pressed back into being in service of that, because so many people are having these direct experiences. And a lot of us have had direct experiences for a long time of what we might call these dimensional consciousnesses. So multidimensional simply means that you are multidimensional means there are active dimensional consciousnesses. They're each distinct, but they all operate on behalf of the greater whole. They all operate in relationship to everything else, and they all are in some level of or degree of quantitative or qualitative. They're all part of each other. In other words, it's like dirt, that if you cut a big piece of the ground out, like in digging peat out of the bog in Ireland, you can see it's all ground, but every ground had a sediment layer that speaks to the world it came from and what was happening in that world. And basically dimensionality is the same exact way, is the same exact thing. They're landscapes, they're layers of landscapes of consciousness that operate in different complex configurations that allow energy and matter to share space. So you could say that from density to less dense to less dense to less dense to less dense until it's etheric. It's ether. It doesn't have a physical nature to it. But we have aspects of us that are not a physical nature. Otherwise, we couldn't dream, we couldn't imagine, we couldn't have our sentient intelligence if that was not true. So I realized that and this has happened a lot in writing the book, is the language base we're drawing from is a thing base. It talks about things and it defines things. It isn't a language that has you be present to what you're present to, opening up into what you're opening up into, and having what you have. It doesn't do that. Not this language, not English. Maybe other languages do. I know that in Spanish there are 3 separate words for being, and those are like dimensional consciousness words, you could say imaginatively. Not really, but because every word gives access to a different landscape of thought. So our landscape of thought has become quite redacted, and in that redaction, we're having to use single words, using English again. We're having to use single words to describe loads of different variations of consciousness, like love, like an agape, agape, philia, and eros. Those are 3 separate types of love. One's friendship, one's of a greater power, and one's a lover. So metacognition has meta with a dash, cognition has 2 challenges. One challenge is that we don't even realize that our thinking thinks about, it doesn't think with. So when you have an experience, you have a direct relationship to what, like you can't miss that you experienced it, then when you go to talk it, you can't talk it because you have to talk about it. And what happens when you talk about it is you lose your relationship, your direct relationship with it, and it becomes a memory, not a recall. Memory as a database of memory. Recall is you can recall it totally, just like you recall, you do a recall on a product, or where the product comes back to you the way it is, or you have recall. What's the other one? When you recall something and you're actually living it again, you're actually experiencing it again. But that's another thing. I discern recall, remembrance, and memory because this recall, remembrance, and memory have three separate landscapes of cognition. In memory, it's a database of an imprinted memory. Usually, it even feels flat, and that memory usually triggers, has an effect in how you experience it in the attached emotion or the attached event connected to it. And I could give you two examples. One was when I was ill. This one's more shocking. I'll give you the more shocking one first. One, I was very, very ill, actually right before I went to Hawaii, and right before I actually got the download of the creation templates, began the download of the creation templates over a couple of years. And when I was young, I'd had some very, very tragic, you would consider, and I would consider tragic things happen to me. I was pretty busted up between my mother kind of flogging me every night, and then what happens when you get lost in trauma is a series of trauma events begin to occur to you. And so I got date raped, gang raped, and then raped and pregnant. So I didn't even remember those three incidences. And but what happened was that years later, as I began to unpack my mind began to unpack on behalf of life and what has us exist as whole, these buried memories could come back up. And the memories came back up with the trauma of the memories. And then i.e. forward a few years later, because this is the whole point of doing the creation exercises. Working with the creation templates and working in field phenomenons of unity is you don't reinforce trauma. You actually transmute trauma into life force energy. So fast forward to when I did an MRI a few years ago when I had had a concussion. I was in the MRI trying not to panic because I don't mind. I love tight places. I don't like tight places when I can't move my head. And so I started singing a song in my head. Open mine eyes that I may see visions of truth thou hast for me. Open mine eyes, illumine me, Spirit divine. And right then, wham, I went flying back into memory. I went into recall, actually, and that we have memory, recall, and remembrance. Remembrance, I'm going to maybe talk a little bit today. But the recall grabbed me, and I was flying back into events in my young life, happy events, picnicking with my mother and father at the lake, my mom holding my hand as we went to church before she had a thyroid disease, and it just basically made her crazy. But not till I was about 10. So all those memories before the trauma events between 10 and 16 and on happened to me. They became my primaries. That all those years of transmuting trauma into life force energy began to pay off, because all of a sudden in this MRI experience, I was in these experiences of being with my mom and dad. They were awesome. They were awesome and fun, but I could feel, see, sense, smell, and touch. That's what recall is. You have all your senses back in recall. In memory, you don't have all your sensors back. You just have the flat image or the flat memory. And then fast forward again is that when I was sick, right before I went to Hawaii, I used to be sick a lot in the winter, almost every winter. And when I was running a fever, I went back into those incidences of being raped. And all of a sudden, this metacognition, this whole metacognition occurred where we were out past the world of right and wrong. They were out past the world of right and wrong. I was out in the field of creation, and I could cognitively see in that meta perception that we were all just trying to figure out love, and that we were in the aberration of it and at the effect of it, and all those things that happened were literally because the human race is at the effect of not knowing how to restore the fundamental template of the experience of love, both physically and non-physically. And as a healer, all the debris around the events disappeared, dissolved. It returned to life force energy, and very possibly did for them too. I don't know. We don't have a way to track empirically this information. So that's that part. That's an in the world, physical, human part. But the part that's so significant about metacognition with a dash is that actually with somebody, again, I can't see comments, which irritates me, but could somebody write metacognition? Oh, I do see them. Okay, would someone write metacognition in META dash cognition so we have a visual? Good morning, everybody. I now see you. So we have a visual to look at the word when I say the word. So the interesting thing, hi Claudette. So the memory. So now let's look at metacognition that I'm languaging, which goes beyond the human framework of human to human and goes into frameworks of experiential states. For instance, we think love is limited to the 3D, but it isn't. The 3D only has height, depth, and width. But as you go into the fourth dimension, you have dreams and visions and memories. As you go into the fifth dimension, you begin to have a sense of oneness. Thank you, Liz. You literally have a different mindset. Literally, you have a different mindset. And I'm aware that those mindsets that occur, like when you experience love beyond all right and wrong doing, that is a dimensional activity where love is not aberrated in the physical world that you found yourself born into. It's out beyond, in another field, in another dimensional consciousness. And different dimensions hold different levels of experience and have different natures of being and have different operating states. And we've all, if you imagine, all that's collapsed into trying to experience all that dimensionality that carries this larger spectrum of love just in the human sector. But what's happened is human beings are under the pressure. They're under the pressure of metacognition, the way Liz put it up. We're under the pressure of that we're metaing, that our cognitive processor is starting to track things and starting to move with things, whether they're visions, which is fourth and fifth dimension, whether they move into the angelic realm, whether they move into supreme beings. All those carry different dimensional consciousnesses, and they don't have our problem. They're all interrelated, interactive, and symbiotic beyond the fourth dimension, which is probably where everything aberrated. And I'm not getting into that. I have a long, gigantic piece of work I did that's not going to be in the book that I'll put somewhere else that unfolds that for you to see if you resonate with, for you to see if it matches. If you can find yourself, your metacognition expanding to be able to think. It's like thinking in another language. The world occurs differently when you're metacognitive. The world doesn't occur as simply human issues. The world doesn't even occur as issues, except for every now and then after a while, because your mind has dimensionalized, your metacognitive, mental metacognitive mind has to be able to think beyond the borders of think about and think beyond the borders of information and can begin to think relationally, literally, relationally. So then this is the power of it. Then you can be in relationship because you can think relationally with bears and angels and deitic principles and sentient beings that are not human, with rocks, with quarks. Everything reframes itself right now into a human having an experience, rather than a human being present to what there is to be present to, opening up into what there is to open up into and having what they have. And what I realized my issue was, because I've been on a rant about this for a while, I realized my issue was that every time I tried to discuss dimensionality or I heard people discussing it, it was something out there. It wasn't something that we were there, or it was here. And it is here. It's all right here. It's all right here, standing right beside you. The fairies. No kidding. The water spirits. The ethers. Prana and chi, we have gotten educated, prana and oxygen. We've gotten educated. We've become metacognitive about that. We can think prana, some of us, and we can think oxygen. That's metacognitive. It means we can think something that the physical body does, and we can think something our non-physical spirit does. Can't you? Absolutely. So basically it's the resonance, it's the vibrational frequency attached to words. Like prana, instantly you go to something non-physical, don't you? Unless you don't know the word. And if you think oxygen, you immediately go to the physical. If you think chi, many of us would think the power, the force coming into the physical body in Tai Chi or martial arts. But notice how they all are metacognitive. You have different thinking relationships with those three words. It's really significant. This is why the creation exercises are so bloody important, because they work in a spiral, golden spiral, which literally allows your function to move out, keep spiraling into greater and greater degrees. It's what makes a cathedral beautiful when it's built in the golden spot, built in the math of the golden spiral. But it's also what makes thinking beautiful. And it makes you able to be present, especially the observing. Makes you be present to what there is to be present to, and lets you open up into, because your neural wiring now can think out beyond, first of all, the field of all right or wrong doing. It also helps you think out beyond thinking about, and you actually, instead of thinking about something, you begin to have a direct relationship with something, and that direct relationship begins to bring language to the surface. You have a different language when you're in a different way of thought patterning. Not a different way of speaking necessarily, but a different way of thought patterning when you're in relationship with something, rather than when you're talking about something. I can tell stories about the bears that love me and take care of me, and we miss each other right now, because my mind, not my personality, my mind was in relationship with them, with their mind. We found a common mind. And that common mind had a dimensional consciousness we could share, because the dimensional consciousness is largely awake in me. It almost drove me crazy when I was young, because I was in direct experiences. I wasn't in talking about experiences. It's interesting too because one of the teachers in the Language Consciousness Institute, when I met her, she really was in direct relationship with a lot of what we would call otherworldly uh, dimensional consciousnesses. Easily, she was and is. But when she share about it, her mental metacognitive structure of her neural fabric was having to translate from her direct experience to trying to be understood and explained. And she came across as loopy or crazy. She's been doing the creation exercises a long time. And now she's one of the fundamental people in another body of work that I do personally. Whereas now when she shares or when she reports in or when she says what she was directly related to, her metacognitive ability to frame it, to bring it in the shared field between ourselves and her is resonant instead of jarring. In other words, resonance of your direct experience, which lives in metacognitive thinking, literally gives you the ability to transmit information that the other person may not be able to understand or may not be able to explain, but they have received the relational field, not the information. And I can see she's still a little biased towards information, but that's okay. That's okay. She'll keep doing creation exercises, and over time, she'll presence the relational field from which the information came from. And then the first product of the communication will be the relational field, not the information. And it's it's so missing. It's terribly missing in the human cognition. It's terribly missing. Terribly missing. And I mean in everyone. I don't mean in everyone, but it's across the board, regardless of the level of what you're present to is, that we go for the information. We don't realize that the metacognition establishes itself inside of the relationship. So when I have these events in my consciousness that record in my mind the first aspect of my, well, it may be not always the first, but the series of events that occur is that I have a hit. I have an empathic response to, I'm in touch with something. Then I have my sentient intelligence gives me access to being present and to opening up, because I don't need logic or reason. I just need sensation, sensitivity, and imagination to open up, for my mind to open up. And then if I just open it up and don't look for the information and don't look for the reason, don't look for logic or reason or explanation or understanding, I just be present to it long enough, then I am present to something, and then my mental perception can gather it into thinking with, and then in that thinking with, when I go to talk, people are in relationship to in their listening, they're in relationship with me. They're in relationship with what I'm with, and where I'm with, the thinking is occurring there. In other words, it's not occurring in my head. The thinking and the speaking is occurring inside of what I'm with, within what I'm with. That's a relational field. But it also is important to know that the matrices that hold the human being's world of multidimensionality is restoring. And we're under the pressure, we're under a metacognitive pressure. Our brain, literally our brain, is under a metacognitive pressure to be able to speak and think within those dimensional consciousnesses, just like we would speak English or Italian, or if we were a doctor, we would speak medical, or if we were a linguist, we would speak, our frame of thought would operate about linguistics. And I don't know how I'm going to get this all unpacked, because as a seer and as a mystic, what I'm present to is what's opening up. And this is what's opening up. And I just don't know anything else besides the creation templates that give people the access. At least when you do a creation template, at least when you do it, you don't have to use it. But your mind will more and more and more be able to not be thwarted from your direct relationship with something that you have become present to and you have opened up into. By the way, it's also become present to you and is opening up to you. We used a word yesterday that sometimes words are so real, and that's true a lot. They're so real and what they hold and what they give access to. If the human culture doesn't yet have that experience, or is thwarted in this case, because we all need an enemy, we all need something wrong, and we all need to be separate. We think that's real, to protect and defend ourselves. But if we didn't have that, the word that Carol presented yesterday was permeable. So after 3D, when you go into dreams and visions, you actually are in a permeable world. You're in a world where nothing is separate from anything else. Nothing, everything is part of everything else. It's permeable. Good word, look it up. So basically, in a reality of unity, we're restoring or returning to or transmuting back into, or transmuting into, maybe not back, a permeable existence, where we are aware that we are in relationship with everything, and everything's in relationship with us, and the meta point of that relationship has different metacognitive languages. And when we're present to those different metacognitive languages, we're filled up by them, because you're filled up by being in unity, being in the unity with something, and something being in unity with you. And right now, our sentient intelligence is the restoration of a human sentient intelligence is largely in that. We have the sense of contact, we have the sense of relationship. We just don't have the metacognition. So thanks. I'm really trying to work this out into an articulate, into an articulation that I can unpack just enough. Because notice when I say permeable, people can get afraid, because this trauma armoring we carry around us lives in this trauma perceived memory of we will be harmed if we open up. We'll be harmed if we're vulnerable. We'll be harmed if we seek relationship. But it doesn't matter. That's the border we're on. We're on a border. I like to mind the border. Do you? I really, really do. How about you?